She was traded for 3 goats. That's how the whispers began. But up on Whisper Ridge, a quiet cowboy named Jonah Pike didn't ask questions. He just opened his door. No promises, no pity, just a fire, a roof, and space to breathe. As rumors grow louder, a mute boy draws hidden springs, and a storm brews behind the cabin. Can trust take root where pride once ruled? And when the town comes calling, will mercy be enough? They said she wasn't worth more than 3 goats. May heard it from behind her mother's apron, from the murmurs at the feed store, from the hard stare her father gave the ground after shaking hands with a man who didn't smile once. Dusty Creek had a way of making cruelty sound casual. She'll be better off, they told each other, sipping weak coffee from tin cups. Quiet girl like that needs a quiet place. No one asked May what she needed. Jonah Pike didn't come down from the ridge often. When he did, he moved like something carved from pine and rock, steady, not silent, and all-weathered calm. He'd been in town just twice that spring, once for nails, once for salt. The third time, he came down on a pale mule with his collar turned against the wind. He said one word: saw. And now, somehow, he stood near the wagon where May's brothers loaded her threadbare valise. His hat was low, his coat stitched at the shoulders, his hands scarred from tool work. He didn't look at her, not at first, just at the sky, like it might rain answers if he gave it time. May's father barked something about the goats being healthy, good stock. Jonah didn't nod. He didn't frown. He just turned, slowly, and held out one hand, not to shake, but to take the lead rope. Then, without ceremony or smile, he tipped his hat toward May and started walking uphill. May looked once at her mother, who was twisting her apron like it owed her debt, and then stepped off the wagon rail. She followed. The trail out of Dusty Creek rose into a patchwork of pine and broken shale. They didn't speak. The Pati mule snorted once, and May caught the smell of iron from Jonah's tools slung in a canvas roll behind the saddle. He moved with the quiet of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Not speed, not strength, just the kind of quiet that held a roof beam in place during a storm. By dusk, they reached a cabin crouched low against the shoulder of Whisper Ridge. It wasn't pretty. Half a roof beam was splintered, the windows patched with waxed cloth, the door hung on a sigh. But smoke still drifted from the chimney, and the pine trees had grown close around the place like old friends leaning in. Jonah opened the door, stepped aside. May crossed the threshold. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood ash and dried herbs. A cot stood near the hearth, made up with rough wool blankets. A low shelf held chipped bowls, one with a crack repaired by wire. Beside the fire sat a small kettle, bubbling faintly. Jonah crossed to the hearth, stirred the pot, then pointed to the bedroll by the wall. He didn't speak, didn't gesture like she owed him comfort or gratitude. He just nudged a log into place and ladled hot water into a cracked mug. He set it on the low table. May stepped forward and sat on the floor, her back to the hearth. She didn't touch the tea, not yet. Her hands were stiff, her breath tight. Jonah crossed to the window, shifted his rifle from the doorframe to the inside sill, closer to her spot than to his own bedroll. It was a wordless thing, but May felt it. Trust, offered not as a reward, but as a beginning. Outside, the wind rose through the trees, carrying the sound of a laugh, too sharp, too far. May stiffened. Jonah didn't react. She stared into the coals. A goat. 3 of them. She wasn't a woman anymore in the eyes of that valley. She was a trade. But here, no one had asked her for anything. Not a name, not a story, not a smile. She reached for the mug. Warmth met her fingers. She would stay the night, maybe the week. By the 3rd morning, May had swept out the cabin twice, sorted the knives by handle size, and tied every loose herb bundle with fresh twine from the saddlebag. Jonah hadn't asked her to do any of it. He simply came in after his morning rounds, set down a small sack of cornmeal, and noticed the shelf no longer slouched to the side. He gave one nod. She gave none back, but she let herself eat the cornmeal cakes without apology that evening. Whispers had climbed the ridge faster than either of them. Three-goat girl. Witch water. Said she spells plants to grow. It came from town hands who'd never set foot past the canyon split, but folks on the edge love a fire. Even when it's smoke, they're passing for flame. One afternoon, Jonah left his rifle inside, not propped by the door, not leaned near his own bedroll, but beside hers. She didn't touch it, didn't need to. That night, the wind carried voices, laughter mixed with the snapping of twigs far down the trail. Jonah listened, then went back to mending the cracked roof beam with a new plank he'd planed that morning. May watched him hammer slow, deliberate, no rush. It was the kind of fixing that said, "I'm building forward." The next day, an old woman climbed the ridge without announcement. Her skirt dragged pine needles. She carried a satchel that smelled like cedar bark and winter roots. "Tamar," she introduced herself. Her voice was warm gravel. "I brought horehound and sassafras, and a tail you can keep or toss." May didn't know what to say, so she poured tea. Tamar sipped, grunted in approval. "You're the traded girl," Tamar said, plain as rain. "But up here, things root where they want. Dead dirt sprouts in a good rain. Question is, are you staying long enough to water it?" May looked out the window, saw Jonah mending the mule's harness under the trees. "I haven't been asked to leave," she said. Tamar nodded. "That's a better beginning than most get." She set down the satchel. "These are yours. Trade's not price. It's what passes between hands that don't expect return." Before she left, she placed one wrinkled palm on May's shoulder and said softly, "Watch the boy." That evening, May met him. He didn't come up the trail like most. He simply appeared, barefoot, charcoal on his fingers, eyes full of something older than his age, 10, maybe 11. He didn't speak, just crouched near the fire pit's edge and started scratching shapes on a flat piece of pine plank. A tree, a creek, a circle with 4 dots. "Finch," Jonah said, as he brought in dry kindling. "Good head for land." Finch looked up at May, then down again, adding a tiny line between 2 dots. May knelt beside him. "Is this here?" she asked, pointing to the drawing. Finch nodded, tapped the circle. Then he tapped the cracked kettle. Then the far wall where Jonah had hung a net of dried moss. She understood. Water. Spring. Hidden. Finch stood and led her outside, still barefoot. They walked past the shed, up a short rise shaded by thick pine. At the base of a rock outcrop, he pulled aside moss and needles to reveal a cool seep. Just a trickle, but it ran over polished stone, soft and steady. She touched the water, cold and clean. Jonah appeared behind them, quiet as dusk. He nodded once, then handed her a tin cup. That night she boiled water from the seep and cleaned the cracked mug before drinking. She marked the drawing on the wall above the shelf, shaded the spring with a curl of coal. Later, when she stepped outside to wash her hands, she saw figures down the trail, 2 or 3, no closer than the canyon's edge, watching, waiting. She stepped back inside and shut the door gently. Something had shifted. This wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a reason. The trail watchers hadn't returned, not openly, but May had noticed new boot tracks near the old pine and a pile of stones knocked over that Finch swore he hadn't touched. Jonah had looked once, said nothing, and started brushing sap onto the porch beam, a quiet way of saying he saw it and wasn't scared. The seep, though, that was something worth guarding. Finch's drawings had become clearer in recent days. The boy couldn't write words, but he knew the land like it spoke in his ear. One charcoal map showed the spring above the outcrop, another with a dotted line running down slope where water had once fed an old catchment basin. May followed the line with her fingers, eyes narrowing. "There used to be a holding spot," she murmured. Finch nodded hard, then dug in his pocket. He pulled out a lump of wax, unwrapped it, and revealed a broken bit of metal pipe, old, rusted, but clearly fitted. "Cistern," Jonah said from the table, watching. May leaned over the map again. "Think it could still hold?" "Not much," Jonah replied, "but enough." They spent the afternoon dragging pine needles, moss, and bark mulch over the seep to shade it better. May cut cloth into strips, dipped them, and laid them across stones as a crude drip line into a basin she dug by hand. By dusk, she had a shallow pool and a pail half full of clean water. That night, Jonah added a line in, his small, thick notebook. Catchment repair begun, water steady, May's plan working. It was the first time he'd written her name. The next morning, Tamar returned, eyes sharp beneath her wide-brimmed hat. She brought bundles of burdock root and crushed mint, but stayed longer than usual. Her gaze lingered on the catchment, the new mulch, the shaded cloths. "Water's clever," she said, "and people get stupid around it." She crouched and dipped her fingers into the pool. "Folks who can't grow their own beans want to claim the pot." "You keep a record, girl?" May nodded. "In Jonah's book. Dates, measures." Tamar's eyes glinted. "Good. Keep doing that. You file a use claim, it'll matter. Law likes tidy ink." May blinked. "Law favors money." Tamar grinned. "Money fades. Ledger's bones last longer, and right now yours are cleaner than theirs." Jonah pulled something from under the bench, a dented pocket watch. He clicked it open. The second hand ticked, slow but steady. He looked at May, then handed it. "Over." "For timing flow," he said. May accepted it like it might shatter in her palm. "It's yours." "Was," he answered. "Now it's needed." She swallowed. "You trust me?" He shrugged once. "Water runs where it's allowed." Later that week, down in Dusty Creek, the same talkers who'd whispered three-goat girl were now spinning new tales. That the girl brewed herbs that made a man forget his debts, that her hands bled into the soil, that Jonah Pike had gone soft from mountain air and a woman's apron strings. Wade Latham, the foreman at the lower ranch, leaned against the saloon rail and laughed. "Fool's trying to grow a garden on rock. Give it 2 weeks, we'll own the whole ridge." He didn't know Jonah had passed by at dusk and heard every word. Didn't know Finch was sketching down the names of who kicked over stones and moved pegs. Didn't know Tamar had once helped the judge's mother survive the fever and still had her ear. Up on the ridge, the catchment was half full again, and the soil under May's fingers smelled like it remembered how to grow. Jonah wrote one more line in his notebook that night. "If water is life, then records are its ribs." The next morning, May folded the pocket watch into a page marked "Flow Start" and added, "Held steady. 2 pails filled. Witness, Finch." Jonah looked at her, then at the ridge beyond. Quiet, grounded. They wouldn't need a shotgun if the truth held, but they might need a preacher. The church picnic stretched across the valley green with tables of cornbread, spiced apples, and good intentions baked into pies. But niceties thinned when eyes turned toward the figures from the ridge. May walked in beside Jonah, basket in one hand, Finch trailing behind like a quiet shadow. Jonah wore his one clean shirt, collar ironed flat. May had tied her hair up and brought wild mint tea, bottled clear and cold. Finch carried a wrapped cloth of burdock candies he'd pressed himself. Tamar met them near the preacher's oak and gave a firm nod. "Don't start no talk. Let them start it. You just hold steady." The first greetings were polite. A few soft smiles, some tight ones. Then came the second looks. "There she is," someone muttered behind a napkin. "Witch of the Ridge. Don't drink her tea, you'll forget your name. She was traded, wasn't she?" "3 goats, I heard." May straightened her shoulders but said nothing. She poured tea slowly, offered it only when asked. Tamar stayed close, sharpening her gaze on every whisper. Then May's family arrived, her father in a 2-new vest, her mother with 2 baskets like peace offerings wrapped in gingham. They smiled as if history hadn't stained the corners of their mouths. Her father reached for the jar of mint tea. "Now that's something. We were just talking about reconciliation, weren't we?" His grin cut sideways. May didn't move. "Reconciliation's a 2-way road. Starts with truth." He cleared his throat. "Well, what matters is you've landed somewhere gentle." Jonah stepped forward, set down his tin cup. "She didn't land. She walked, on her own feet." Several heads turned. Her mother touched May's arm. "It's better when family stands together." Jonah looked around the yard, calm, but with spine. "Family's not blood alone. It's who shows up, who stays, who listens when you say no." That's when Wade Latham walked up, grinning like the butter hadn't melted yet. "Well," he drawled, "seems we've got quite a little community project going. Ridgewater, healing herbs, hospitality. Shame there ain't a deed to match." Jonah didn't flinch. "Use precedes deed. That's the law." Latham smirked. "The law also says water's public interest. Sometimes the safety of the town outweighs the squatting of one cabin." May stepped forward. "We aren't squatting. We've filed for use. Domestic, irrigation, teaching." Latham laughed, loud and sharp. "Teaching? You planning to start a school up there with your ghost boy and pine needle spells?" Tamar narrowed her eyes. "The boy's smarter than most men in this square. You'd do well to pay him for a map before you go digging ditches that don't belong to you." Latham tilted his head, amused. "I was only asking, Miss Tamar, is it? Surely no harm in discussing rights among neighbors." "Depends on your idea of neighbor," Tamar replied, "and your idea of rights." By now the preacher had stepped forward, brow drawn. May met his gaze. "Reverend, I need a record." "Just a note. Time, use, and intention. For that seep." He nodded. "You asking for a witness?" "I am." Jonah finally spoke again, slow and even. "She belongs to herself." The words dropped like a hammer into silence. A woman near the peach pies gasped. Another man whispered. He finally talked. The preacher cleared his throat. "I'll write it. I'll sign it, and I'll bring it to the clerk." Tamar smiled wide. "That'll do." Finch tugged May's sleeve and handed her a folded paper, his drawing of the seep and shaded catchment. She laid it next to the basket of mint tea in plain view. Latham stepped back. "This ain't the end." "No," May said. "It's the middle. And the truth walks farther than talk." Jonah turned back to the picnic table, poured a new cup of tea, and sat beside Finch. Above them, the clouds gathered slow and quiet, the kind of clouds that meant a storm would come. 2 days after the church picnic, Jonah and May rode down into Dusty Creek with a folded sheet of paper, a clean ledger page, and Finch's charcoal map tucked carefully into her satchel. Jonah said nothing on the trail. May said little more. The silence between them had grown comfortable, like the hush between breaths. Not absence, but trust. At the clerk's desk, Jonah stood straight and quiet while May filled in the form by hand. Domestic water use. Teaching garden. Catchment maintenance. Recorded by consent and witnessed at picnic by Reverend Ezra. The preacher's signature already lay in ink, curved and careful. The clerk, a soft-spoken man named Gentry, read it twice and nodded. No one's laid a prior claim to that spring. Looks clean. We'll enter it into the book. May gave a tight smile. It'll hold? If there's dispute, the county judge'll call it. But you've started right. They left town without fanfare. No one clapped, no one jeered. But folks watched from doorways, measured looks, not sure yet which way to lean. Back on the ridge, Jonah reset the survey pegs Finch had marked. Straight lines across rough terrain. He worked by sun, checking angles with his pocket watch and Finch's drawings. When the boy smiled and handed him a rock with a scratch mark, Jonah tapped it once and pocketed it. That evening, May opened the cabin door to two girls with scraped knees and runny noses. She boiled water, set them by the hearth, and listened while their mother cried on the porch about her husband's bad back and no money for doctors. May didn't charge her. She brewed tea, rubbed salve into joints, and taught the older girl to stir the tonic without burning the pot. The next day, 3 more came. By week's end, she had a half-circle of chairs by the fireplace, a table cleared for poultices, and a little boy reciting names of herbs while Finch drew their shapes in charcoal on spare wood. The children called it the school, but someone else called it a threat. Jonah found the first sign 2 mornings later, his survey peg kicked over and jammed into a tree trunk, split clean. Beside it, a strip of red cloth hung from a broken branch, the kind of ribbon someone ties when they want you to feel watched. That night, the hex mark came, drawn in soot on their door, a circle with bent arms and a red slash through the center. May wiped it off with vinegar and sage. Didn't flinch. Jonah set the rifle back by the door for the first time in weeks. Later that evening, they caught the men, not by chase but by lamplight. 2 of them, crouched near the edge of the catchment, whispering. Jonah didn't shout, didn't raise the rifle. He walked out slow, lantern held high, and May followed with Finch behind. Evening, Jonah said, steady. The men froze. One rose halfway, the other bolted. Jonah didn't chase. The one who remained looked at the ground. Tell Latham, Jonah said, voice calm. We don't want to fight. We've got records, neighbors, a preacher's name in ink. The man muttered, You're pushing it too far. May stepped beside Jonah. Then you'd better push back with something better than soot. He hesitated, then turned and walked off into the dark, boots scuffing rocks like kicked cans. Tamar arrived the next morning, chewing pine bark and scowling at the re-kicked pegs. You write this down yet? She asked Jonah. He nodded. Everything. Time, weather, what they wore. Good, she said. You write what you can't fight. The rest comes later. They stood in the clearing as the breeze stirred ash from the fire pit. Jonah looked at May. We'll file for peace, he said, but we'll be ready for court. And she answered, Then let's keep the ledger open. The arrest came plain and quiet, like a knock on a door no one wanted to answer. Jonah was hauling water when Deputy Murdoch rode up the ridge, hat in hand and apology written all over his face. May stood by the cook fire, spoon in hand, her back straight. Mr. Pike, the deputy said, there's a complaint sworn in town. Says you tampered with a legal boundary, moved pegs, trespassed. I gotta take you in. Jonah looked at May once, calm as ever, and handed her the bucket. Water's full, he said. May stared at the deputy. You've seen those pegs. You've seen Finch's map. I have, Murdoch said, voice low. but Latham made it official. The judge'll sort it, but I have to do the hauling. Jonah nodded once. No fight in him, just the quiet dignity of a man who understood the weight of systems. May followed them halfway down the ridge. Jonah never once looked back. By the time she reached the town square, the whispers were already flying. Three-Goat Girl cursed him. Mountain justice don't hold in court. She'll bring rot to your well just by walking past. Chip. Latham leaned against the railing of the general store, thumb hooked in his vest. Funny how quiet men don't stay quiet when there's property involved, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. May didn't answer him. She walked straight to the deputy's desk and placed Finch's charcoal map on the counter. Marked dates, flow rates, witness signatures. Reverend Ezra stepped from the doorway and added a folded sheet. My note from the picnic. Full record of intent and use. Murdoch looked at the papers and rubbed his temples. Judge'll have to see it. Not till court day. Can't override it till then. May's family stood in the street, watching. Her father shifted his weight but said nothing. Her mother looked down at the basket she'd brought and turned away. Tamar appeared next, stepping onto the boardwalk like thunder on two legs. Heard a child left this cabin last week without coughing. Slept for the first time in months. That girl, she pointed to May, boiled the tea. Jonah held the mother's hand. A hush followed her words. Murdoch looked like he wanted to leave his own badge behind. That night, Jonah lay on a hard bunk under flickering oil light, hat pulled low over his eyes. He listened to the keys clink, to the drunk in the other cell snoring like a mule, to the creak of the ceiling fan above. He didn't need comfort. He just needed time to move. At the cabin, May sat by the fire, hands still stained with pine soot. Finch kept drawing. Tamar kept stirring broth. The pegs had been kicked again. She reset them, slow and sure, writing the time and date in Jonah's ledger with deliberate strokes. Sometime near dawn, rain tapped the tin roof of the jail. A slow, even rhythm. Jonah tilted his head to listen. Back at the cabin, May stepped out barefoot and let the drops hit her face. The catchment filled quietly. The garden straw darkened with moisture. The deputy came at sunrise, unlocking the door with a tired sigh. Judge says it'll go to court. But you're free till then. May made a case strong enough to hold you up. Jonah stood, stretched once, and took his hat. Outside, the town looked smaller in the morning light, less sure of itself. On the boardwalk, Latham watched from beneath his umbrella. Jonah didn't nod. He didn't need to. He walked toward the mule where May was already waiting, Finch at her side, satchel in hand. They rode uphill in silence. And behind them, the rain kept falling, not harsh, but steady. A kind of reckoning, slow as justice, but twice as patient. Rain still clung to the ground when court day came. Dusty Creek's town hall smelled of old timber and wet coats. Wooden pews creaked beneath settled tension. The judge, a stoop-shouldered man with clear eyes and no patience for nonsense, adjusted his spectacles and tapped a knuckle against the desk. Case of Pike and Maynard versus Latham, he said. Claims related to beneficial water use, unlawful tampering, and boundary dispute. Present your record. Jonah stood up first, hat in hand. He didn't speak more than he had to. Name's Jonah Pike. I filed for domestic and teaching use. Springs on Ridgeland. Catchment existed before me. I rebuilt it. Then he stepped back. May walked forward with the ledger cradled in both arms, careful as if it held fire. She laid it open on the clerk's table. These are dates, she said, voice calm, of when the catchment held water. Here are names of visitors helped, weather notes, yields, drawn and signed. Finch stepped up, eyes lowered, and handed the judge his charcoal map. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Quiet, the judge said. Reverend Ezra rose from the gallery. I witnessed their intent to file. I signed the page myself. The judge gave a short nod. Thank you, Reverend. Deputy Murdoch approached next. Heard Wade Latham brag in the square. Said he'd take the ridge with a shovel and some paper. Never saw him at the spring. Saw Jonah reset pegs twice. Quiet, steady. Then Tamar stood. She carried a battered tea tin, set it, gently on the judge's table, and opened the lid. Inside lay a folded paper, aged but intact, edges curled, ink faded. Found this in my mother's chest, Tamar said. She surveyed that ridge once, back when Finch's mother was just a girl. She unfolded the page. The judge leaned close. It's a land sketch, Tamar explained. Catchment noted. Ridge seep marked, signed and dated. 74. The judge held the paper to the light. Matches the boy's drawing. Matches the ledger. He looked up. Mr. Latham? Wade Latham adjusted his vest and pushed off from the wall where he'd been trying to smirk through it all. Respectfully, Your Honor, I was looking out for town safety. Ridge water use hadn't been regulated. Thought I'd bring some order to it. You brought your men at night, the judge replied. You left soot symbols on a door. You signed a false complaint that wasted county time. Latham shifted. That was a misunderstanding. No, the judge said. It was a tactic. He turned to Jonah. Your claim holds prior use proven. Teaching function noted. This court affirms your right to the seep under law. A few folks clapped. Most stayed quiet, shame and admiration folding together like hard bread. The judge wasn't done. Mr. Latham, you'll pay a fine. Your men are barred from ridge access. Any further interference will be prosecuted. May's kin are advised to cease slander or face civil penalty. A rustle passed through the crowd as May's father lowered his eyes and her mother gripped her shawl tighter. The judge paused, fingers tapping the map once. There is one more matter. This old sketch names a co-claimer, Finch's mother, makes Finch the heir to a portion of the seep. Finch blinked. May reached for his hand and squeezed it. Jonah nodded once. Latham stormed out without waiting. The deputy removed Jonah's cuff key and set it on the table with a clink that sounded more like a thank you than an apology. Outside, the rain had let up. Tamar handed May her tin back, empty now. Reverend Ezra stepped close. Would you share water-wise practices with the schoolhouse, Miss May? May smiled. We'll bring tea and Finch's drawings. Jonah spoke low, steady. We've got rails and seed to offer, too. Rain tapped once more on the eaves, soft, promising. And on the boardwalk, May's father stood empty-handed. He didn't speak. May reached into her satchel, pulled out a small jar of salve and held it out. No need to earn it, she said. Just use it right. Dusty Creek didn't change overnight, but something quiet settled into the cracks that week. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not fearful, but listening. After the judge's ruling, Wade Latham kept to the shadows. His foreman's coat lost its sharpness, and the men who once rode behind him peeled off, one by one. He no longer strutted past the mercantile or lingered at the saloon rail. He'd become the echo of a threat no one believed anymore. Jonah returned to the ridge with no chains around his wrists and no eyes on his back. He didn't smile. He never did. But he brought up fresh rail lengths and split cedar planks, and by that evening, the cabin's sagging fence stood straight again. May didn't ask what the town thought now. She had children to tend, salve to mix, and Finch's drawings to pin beside the hearth where they could teach someone else. Tamar brought seeds and a rusted hoe with a new handle. Teaching gardens got legs, she said, longer than gossip ever walked. The cabin brimmed with warmth now, not the kind from firewood, but from motion, curious kids, returning neighbors, quiet help offered without fanfare. A knock came just before supper one evening. The door creaked open, and there stood Deputy Murdoch. Not in uniform, no badge on his chest, just a basket in one hand and Finch's old charcoal tin in the other. "Figured you'd want this back," he said, offering the tin. "And, the missus baked sweetbread. Thought maybe you'd share it with the ones still walking up your hill." May took both with a nod. "They'll be welcome." "I reckon so," he said, then turned to go, stopping at the threshold. "Oh, and the judge asked if you'd keep notes for the town on catchment rights. Help folks understand their share without fighting over buckets." Jonah looked up from the hearth. "We'll write it down. Simple and fair." The deputy nodded, and his boots carried him down the trail like he finally belonged somewhere again. That night, May carved a new line in the ledger. Request from county judge, share record keeping. Teaching to extend beyond ridge. She smiled at the words, then underlined share. 3 days later, her father returned, not with goats or gifts, just a cracked walking stick and a question in his eyes. May met him at the gate. Her mother stood behind, hands wrung in silence. "We got nothing left on the flats," her father said. "Rain washed seed out, and the old mule pulled his last." May said nothing. She walked back to the shed and returned with a small sack of seed, a jar of salve, and a folded slip of paper with Finch's planting map sketched in charcoal. "Enough to leave with a full belly," she said, "but not more than we can afford." He took it all without a word, and when he turned away, May didn't watch him go. That night, the children circled around the fire as Finch explained how mulch held water and how to shade a drip line with pine fronds. He never spoke, but his hands told more than words could. Tamar sipped tea and leaned toward Jonah. "You ever think this ridge'd hold a school?" Jonah shrugged, eyes on May. "Didn't think it'd hold me." Outside, the spring still flowed steady. The rain hadn't flooded. It had nourished. Quiet roots, once crushed under stones, now pushed through soil, stretching. The cabin roof, once sagging, now bore the weight of weather without flinching. May stood on the porch at dusk, watching the trail. The lights of Dusty Creek flickered below, no longer menacing, just there. And up on the ridge, where the wind had once carried cruel laughter, it now carried a different sound. Children's feet in straw mulch, charcoal scratching on plank, a kettle singing low, and in all of it, something sacred, something earned. Weeks passed, then months, and the ridge held. The catchment stayed full through late summer, shaded by fresh pine that Finch had helped plant in a line like a soft-spoken promise. Water moved slow and clean now, down from the seep to the garden, into barrels for tea and basins for washing. What started as survival had turned into something structured, durable, like fence rails and clear ink. The cabin, once a patchwork of borrowed things, had become a home. Jonah reinforced the roof beams with proper joinery. May lined the shelves with labeled jars, golden salve, dried mint, elderberry, a few new blends she didn't name yet. Finch built a rack for his drawings, each one neatly tacked to a strip of waxed canvas near the hearth. Children came 3 days a week now. They learned how to mix soil with moss, how to whisper to seedlings, and how to watch a plant before cutting it. They also learned how to listen, to themselves, to each other, to the wind. Jonah never said much, but he was always there, fixing, carrying, watching. One day, May found him at the workbench carving a name into a shallow wooden bowl. She looked closer and read, May. She touched the edge with her thumb. Why that? Jonah wiped the blade and said simply, It's yours. You built it. She didn't reply. She just held the bowl like it meant more than her name had in years. Late one afternoon, The ridge path stirred again. May saw the dust first, then the shape of her father's old coat, worn and patched. This time, he came alone. No baskets, no rope, just hands that looked like they'd tried and failed at something too hard to admit. She met him at the gate. He didn't ask to come in. "We lost the lower field," he said. "Rain was late. Mule died. I know I have no claim here." "You don't," May answered. He nodded, accepting it. "But," she said, softening, "I have seed." She went to the shed and brought him a cloth pouch, a folded map drawn by Finch, and a tin of balm. "It's enough to leave with a full belly," she said, "and enough to start right." He didn't speak, but when he reached for the pouch, his hands shook. That evening, under the sunset's long shadows, May sat on the porch with Finch drawing beside her and Jonah splitting kindling nearby. The ridge breathed like a living thing. Wood creaked, tea steamed, the wind nudged the curtains. Finch stood and pointed to the path where 3 small silhouettes were walking slowly up the hill. 2 mothers and a boy with a cough May could already hear from the porch. She rose and opened the door. "We've got room," she said. "Come in slow. Sit near the heat." They did, and behind them the hush of the trees closed again. Tamar arrived just after dark, carrying seed potatoes and a crooked smile. "You're the quietest storm I ever saw," she told May. "Storms destroy," May answered. "This one, planted." Jonah sat beside the fire and turned the bowl over in his hands. "Rain's never just punishment," he said, "when it falls where it's needed." Finch drew a sprout from the soil, just a line with 2 leaves, but with roots spreading far underneath. May took the ledger from the shelf and opened to a clean page. Shared crops, seed gifts, healing record, Finch's drawings archived. She dipped her pen and looked toward the open door. On the porch rail, a kernel of corn rolled from her pocket. She picked it up, cupped it in her palm, and knelt by the window box. 1 seed, 1 story. She pressed it into the soil just as thunder rolled soft from the west. And this time, no one flinched.